This Week in Fantasy, Week 12 preview. Let's jump right in. At the top of the Cursed Lands division sits Weston and me, oy vey. Both of these teams have been formidable, obviously, with 8-3 records. Weston is the only team whose points against is in the triple digits still. Everyone else is at least 1,000 or better. These two teams are playing each other. It has tremendous impact on the playoffs because they are tied at the top of the division at 8-3. I have won the first matchup of the year, but Weston has dominated the matchup historically. So right out the gate, one thing that you have to note is that my team is pretty weak because the Rams defense and Brandon Cooks are both on bye. In addition to that, AJ Green is nursing a toe injury. It's looking like he might play, although his fate is not certain, and with several games happening earlier in the week, it makes your options a little bit thinner, a little bit more difficult. And when the Rams are on bye, so many people have the Rams on their team in some capacity, whether it be the defense, Jared Goff, Gurley, one of the many receiving options. The Rams are very popular. Like many good teams, there are a lot of people to choose from. So the fact that they're on bye is a big deal, you know. It's not like when the Dolphins are on bye and it's like, oh, well, some of the games are early this week and I don't know if I need to start Ryan Tannehill or not. Let's be real, guys. I don't know what the Dolphins are doing. And every year they're mediocre and it's like, oh, well, their defense is okay. At the beginning of the year they're really good and then they were horrific. They're just a mess. And as far as other Florida teams go, look at the Jacksonville Jaguars. They might have gotten Fournette back, and he might be doing pretty well, as we see in this matchup. Fournette, he is playing against a pretty decent Buffalo defense, and since he has returned from injury, he's been formidable. He has minimized T.J. Yeldon and Carlos Hyde. He's peeled off 20 pieces in his last two games. I don't think he'll peel off a full 20 against Buffalo, although I do think he'll do well. Duke Johnson, and by Duke Johnson, of course, I mean David Johnson. So many times I see D Johnson and sort of like get excited, oh, David, and then, oh no, it's Duke, and then get disappointed. And even though it's on my own team, I did the opposite of that. David Johnson, with the new offensive coordinator of the Cards, is starting to get the ball in more ways than just, okay, run into 8 people because we have a rookie running back, and they're just going to stack 8 in the box. They're throwing it to him like they did in all those years previous where he was really getting the ball a lot in the passing game, and they were just trying to use him. Remember back in the days when Dez Bryant was in his prime and the Cowboys would just throw him the screen like 3 or 4 times a game, really try to just get him the ball and let him do something with it? That's what the Cards need to start doing with David Johnson. He is their best option. Funnily enough, the Cardinals' aged receiver, Larry Fitzgerald, reeled in 2 touchdowns for Lily last week against me, and it was looking like that was going to be one of the main factors in her defeating me. We will revisit that game next after this. So Coleman, of course, has gotten the majority of the carries since the boy Devote Freeman, is what I like to call him. He's devoted to being average. This year he was worse than average. He was horrible. Spencer tried to pawn him off on me. I wasn't having any of it. Shit, Coleman gets about 40% of the points and looks anyway. Thing about Devote, he's the ground and pound guy, but the Falcons are a pass-first team, and Coleman will get these passing touchdowns. Sometimes they're long, a lot of times they're just little screens, but they like to use him in the red zone when it comes to passing. He's also we're going to put him in on the passing down, and then he does a little slip play out to the flats. I drafted Freeman too many years to know that he's pretty overrated for where you draft him usually. Carson Wentz was horrible last week for Weston. He's playing the Giants this week. He'll do very well. Drew Brees is having a phenomenal year, and he's playing Atlanta. I expect him to put up at least 30. He has just been phenomenal. His completion percentage is absurd. I think it's like 78. Something jaw-dropping. Aaron Jones has peeled off huge weeks for Weston these last couple weeks. He's playing Minnesota's defense, and I honestly think he will do pretty well. The funny thing is even though that he has been doing pretty well, the Packers just keep losing, and it looks like they're not going to make the playoffs. So I'm not really sure about the Packers, but I think Aaron Jones is going to do well. So if you look at Weston's top and my top, the clear advantage here is Fournette over Coleman. But other than that, I would say that it's two washes. Look at receiver. The issue here is I have question marks. We know Michael Thomas is going to be great. He has been Drew Brees' consistent option, a beneficiary of Drew Brees having a phenomenal year. Of course, the Saints spread it around, but Michael Thomas is the best receiver, the most consistent receiver, and I feel like he's the guy who consistently gets the touchdowns. And in fantasy football, that is what you're looking for. Emmanuel Sanders, who I think a lot of people thought was going to be sort of mid-tier, has been very good. Ranked 12, he's been the main guy in that offense. Thomas is gone. Rob Gronkowski, of course, has been rather disappointing despite being talented. Essentially what happens is he gets safety helped or just fucking fouled. They just defensive pass interference or hold the shit out of him. And, of course, you don't get penalties for 20-yard defensive pass interferences. You get jack shit for those. And if I said you don't get penalties for them, I meant you don't get fantasy points. You do get penalties for them. You don't get penalties for points. If we look at my bench, Cooks has been solid, rank 11. This is a guy who gets consistent looks in a sharp offense. Sean McVay loves to dial up all this cutesy stuff. He loves to run misdirections. And talking about the Rams offense and the Chiefs offense, we of course got to see them duke it out on Monday Night Football recently. One thing that they both do is they're always faking stuff. It's not the advantage of, oh, we're going to run 20 end around or reverses a game. It's not like the volume of trick or gimmicky plays. It's the threat of doing them. It's sending people in motion. Having to respect that and worry, okay, actually, so many of these plays are basically fake reverses and end arounds. Well, what does that come down to? It comes down to the fact that even if they don't do it, you have to respect it. And in offenses with lots of weapons, having to respect plays like that is very difficult. Because how are you going to respect that when the other option is Kareem Hunt running it down your throat or Tyreek Hill running down the seam? It's very difficult. It's not like the Cowboys offense where it's like, okay, there's Cole Beasley in motion. If they hand it to him, it's going to be 5 yards. You know, like, until, especially before the Cowboys got Amari Cooper, it was a joke. The Cowboys could line up in the spread and you could still stack 8 in the box. What were they going to do? It was really, the lack of weapons on the Cowboys was to that level. It was that bad. And it has made people treat Dak like he's a joke, like he's a bust. I'm not saying Dak is great. I think Dak is above average if you treat him like a guy who runs as a weapon, sort of like a Cam Newton. Maybe you hope that he becomes a guy who's significantly more accurate than Cam Newton because he can't really bully people like Cam Newton, who can just ramrod it down people's throat. But Dak didn't have weapons. That's why the Cowboys look so bad. Jason Garrett has no creativity. When you look at the Sean McVay and Andy Reid play calling and scheming versus the Jason Garrett play calling and scheming, it's laughable. Jason Garrett sits over there and does the same shit he's been doing since 2009. You know, he claps, he calls screens, he likes to run it up the gut. If you're lucky, he'll call a bootleg. At least when he calls the bootleg, that suits Dak's character. Unfortunately, character and skill set. Unfortunately, without Jason Witten and the threat of a Dez Bryant when he still had talent, rest in peace, that doesn't really work. When it's like, oh, is he gonna run it or throw it to Swain? Okay, who cares? That's what defenses are thinking. So that's what I think about Jason Garrett. 2 weeks ago, funnily enough, everyone was calling for his job. It was pretty much the consensus opinion, which when the absolute consensus opinion is for you to lose your job, usually it means you're about to lose your job. Funnily enough, with the Cowboys, since Jason Garrett is just a puppet, Jerry firing him wouldn't really make sense because Jason Garrett is just an extension of Jerry. What's the point of doing that? Jerry would be, in a sense, firing himself. He doesn't want to fire his puppet and then cede power to a coach, a real coach who's actually going to want to run shop. No, Jerry wants to be that dude. He's the owner, he's the GM, and Jason Garrett is his mouthpiece, okay? Jason Garrett to me is essentially like a Jeb Bush type guy. He sits there, he's concerned about clapping, he's sort of impotent and doesn't really have any real answers. And at the end of the day, he's a guy who is just going to let stuff happen. But since the fire has been lit under his ass in the last couple weeks, particularly in this last game, you saw Jason Garrett was thinking outside the box, taking risks, running direct snaps to the ump back Jeff Heath on 4th and 2. This was a guy who very clearly was playing for his job and was not going to mail it in and clap and do this sort of garbage, monotonous play calling that he's been doing. I'm not saying that, he's the next Sean McVay or anything, but this was definitely a marked change in the Cowboys. What do I think the record's going to be? The viewer might be asking. 9-7. I think they might squeak into the wild card and lose in the first round, but I think they could make the playoffs. So Juju Smith-Schuster has been rather consistent. He had a bad week, or I think he had a couple bad weeks. He had a couple bad weeks, but overall, I would say that he's been very solid. Antonio Brown is on the other side. Sometimes he draws doubles. And in general, the Pittsburgh Steelers have a rather explosive offense. Le'Veon Bell isn't coming back, which I think if you're any of the Pittsburgh Steelers players' owners, except Le'Veon himself, you'll love this. It means that no one's production is going to be touched, particularly James Conner. I know that Spencer in particular, but really anyone who was doing any thinking was sort of thinking, anyone who was doing any sort of forecasting or predictions was sort of sitting there saying, well, when is Le'Veon going to come back and how is that going to affect Ben and Jackson? Because Jackson had Connor, Ben had Bell. Well, Ben is sort of on the cusp, almost not even really a factor, and if Bell came back a couple weeks ago, that might have changed things. But Bell is gone, and for Ben, that is a big deal. We'll get into that later. But for Jackson, this is huge. An undefeated team maintains a top-tier weapon. And Jackson, with his diligence, picked up Nick Chubb. This is a guy, Jackson, who isn't going anywhere. He's won again in a week where he was tested. Even if he loses a regular season game, he's still a juggernaut. Kiki QT is someone who I picked up coming off of injury. He did average last week, didn't catch a touchdown, 77 yards. 9 targets, Texas Tech guy. Deshaun Watson looks good. The Texans are starting to be able to put up points on a decent scale. It's not the greatest show on turf, but it's not to the point where the Texans are scoring 14 points a week and Deshaun Watson still looks like he's recovering from injury. Eric Ebron put up a goose egg for me last week. And Juju Smith-Schuster, of course, is talented. Now with A.J. Green being a question mark, if he plays, that means that I can sort of go forth with this lineup. If he doesn't play, Smith-Schuster becomes the guy. And even though he's talented, I would say that he's lower A tier. But then I would have to do something gross here with the lineup to get a flex going. Robbie Gould's going to be the starter versus Tampa. And I like the Cowboys' defense against Washington here. Colt McCoy is playing, an injury-prone guy. It's going to be his first week back. I know everyone's pointing to the fact that Colt McCoy lit up the Cowboys a few years ago, but I think the Cowboys' defense will do decent against Colt, especially on Thanksgiving. And frankly, it will be entertaining to watch. Weston gets the Jags against Buffalo, although Nathan Peter meme has been cut. Mixon is going to get the go, of course. He has come back. That has hurt Gio Bernard's value tremendously. And the Bengals, are sort of this dopey team in my eyes. They're not bad, but you can't trust much outside of A.J. Green, although Mixon has been okay. And against Cleveland, I like him here. Overall, I definitely think Weston gets an edge over me here. I think it'll be a good game. It'll certainly be the game of the week. But I give Weston the edge, definitely. And if you look at his his bench, he has more options to go to. He just has kicker on bye, who cares? So where do we go from here? Let's jump into last week, me versus Lily. I know I mentioned I would bring this up. I would bring up this guy specifically, Fitz. 2 receiving touchdowns, although not many yards to go with it. Amari Cooper came up soft. But in the Cowboys offense, they sort of do this thing where they put up like 21 points and win close games. None of the fantasy guys other than Zeke, who had a tremendous day, are going to be worth much. Matthew Stafford got a win versus the Panthers, who thanks to Graham Gano pissed away a game. Gano missed a PAT and a pretty easy field goal and ended up costing his team the game. And interestingly enough, the Panthers ended up going for it because essentially they didn't trust Gano. Miller, Anthony Miller, I believe, was a long shot guy picked up last minute who reeled in a touchdown. Juju Smith-Schuster was having a rough day until the Steelers came back against the Jacksonville Jaguars, flash in the pan. He put up a solid 10. So did Cooks. David Johnson looked great, and by great, I mean look, he's getting well over 100 yards. I love to see that. Coleman was okay. Against Dallas, I was honestly expecting at least 10, but Drew Brees made up for it. Fly, Eagles, fly, as the most obnoxious fan base in the entire NFL is shut up in a tremendous blowout, 40-plus points. Open that mouth, Philly, and gargle that one. As far as Lily goes, Falcons put up 2. Great kicker start here against Arizona, and even though Oakland's bad, he basically just knocked in a bunch of field goals. Ty Montgomery has been a dud, and it looks as though he's not helping his new team at all after sinking his former one. Classic. Zeke pretty much carried Lily here, and Lily was up. I think it was 14 points going into Monday night. I had the Rams, and I had Cooks. Now, funnily enough, Cooks didn't get me enough to win, despite it being an over 100-point combined game. But Patrick Mahomes turned it over so many times. The Rams defense put up 21. And the way it works is if a defense gives up 35 plus, they get -4. So they got -4, but got so many turnovers and other goodies that they put up 21. So Lily loses again, and I win a game I badly needed to win, because if we look at Weston here, this was looking like a surefire win for Seagouch. His old Seagoucher had about an 8-point lead going into the Minnesota game when he had Kyle Rudolph and Dalvin Cook. And you're looking at that thinking like, okay, that's at least 5. But it actually averaged out to about a goose egg, because Kyle Rudolph did about nothing. Dalvin Cook fumbled it and actually got negative. So what does that mean? Well, frankly, it means that Seagouch only had that 8-point lead going into Monday Night Football, which turned out to be one of the highest scoring games ever. Top 5 ever, highest on Monday Night Football, so shocker, Harrison Butker got 9 points. Now, interestingly, there was a moment in the first half where the Chiefs choked and couldn't get it in when they were very close. I think they were on like the 5-yard line or something. And then they did the typical motion around, fake reverse, but then had a neutral play and had to kick a chip shot. Had they gotten a touchdown there, which honestly everyone in the building I felt like thought they were going to do, Weston would have had 2 less points and lost the game. It was so close because it looked like Weston was dead going into Sunday Night Football, because there was really no way that Dalvin Cook and Kyle Rudolph should have put up under 4. Think about that. That's all they had to do is under 4. Dalvin Cook really hamstrung Seagouch here. T.Y. Hilton went off. Lamar Jackson was nice here because he actually outperformed Matt Ryan, funnily enough. I don't know why Seagouch was all over Derrick Henry, and then now that he's actually doing well, Seagouch is benching him. Now, I know 5 points isn't well, but Dalvin Cook's playing Chicago and Khalil Mack in Chicago. Now it's November. Once it gets to about mid-November and it's at Chicago, Chicago's defense is good again. Pretend that Khalil Mack is the new Brian Urlacher. You want to be wary about starting guys like Cook, who frankly have been probably, ranked 70. Okay. I was gonna say he's been worse than Henry, ranked 39, and like in my head I knew it was true, but I also knew Derrick Henry didn't have much talent. So to come out and say, oh yeah, he's worse, because I actually think as players, if you throw fantasy out the equation, Cook's probably better. But fantasy-wise, Cook's been horrible. OBJ's finding his groove. The Giants are sort of realizing that they're going to be able to squeak out games versus bad teams. They're playing Philly. I think they might even be able to win again, which will be funny. Because I think it would just be hilarious to see the insufferably arrogant Philly fan base gargle this huge losing record. It's just really humiliating year after they, of course, just bragged incessantly after the Super Bowl win. But after that, they have to play Chicago. I just don't see it. A lot of Giants fans are sort of trying to meme into reality this thing where they think they're going to make the playoffs. But I think that the Giants, what are they going to do? Well, they'll go like 8-8 or 7-9, and then OBJ will talk, but in the end they'll miss. And they'll miss big because they'll get a lot of people's hopes up. They lost to Dallas, and let's think here. They lost to Dallas in week 2. Where's the other Dallas game? Am I blind? Okay, I guess I'm blind or something. So C. Gouge loses here, essentially his Super Bowl, because now he's 2-9. Jackson had a very close game against Sam, where Todd Gurley didn't put up nearly any points, but at the last minute he won. This was a big deal because Sam is one of the main wildcard contenders. Rampy's team put up 101. Ben was down about 45 going into Monday Night Football and had easily won by halftime. Mahomes 35, Hill 33. That's a big load. Yeah. Stephen A. Ray, Spence put up 137. He's looking strong. Cameron loses again. He's on a 5-game lose streak. This is typical Cam. Start out pretty good, go to shit during the bye weeks. Let's jump it back a week. No Fried picks up a solid win. I humiliate Cameron over doubling his score. Just crushed. Eric Ebron, 3 touchdowns. David Johnson getting his groove back. Spencer wins a close one versus Gouch. I know these two hate each other. Look at this bug where it shows this kicker could still play. That's very common because he's bye this week, I believe. So that's why that bug exists. Mike Ingram does well. Jared Goff does well. Greg the Leg and the Chargers get Spencer 25. That's always nice when your kicker and defense can get 25. Keenan Allen got him Keenan Allen got him 12. AB got him 15.5. Here we see OBJ starting to live up to his value again for saving Matt Ryan. Weston wins. We see here, of course, Aaron Jones does incredibly well. Leonard Fournette does incredibly well. When you can mix those two guys into your lineup, it's very lethal. And just going back one more week, we have to revisit this game, Spencer versus me. Now, early on in the season, Spencer predicted this as a surefire loss, and you can see why. David Johnson on bye, TJ Yeldon on bye, Eric Ebron on bye, Bernard on bye, AJ Green on bye. Gronk was hurt this week. My kicker, Matt Bryant, was also hurt. It was looking scary. And there were no tight ends because Eric Ebron and Gronk were both unavailable. I was down a little bit going into Monday Night Football. I started Janu Smith, who managed to get 9, and this was the death nail into Spencer, who despite putting up 102, lost a close game. And even though the Rams got negative, I managed to pull this one out. Jackson, of course, won his game, steady grinding the 100-point performances. Ben looked good, putting up 100. No Fried and New Guys had a slugfest. and Mitchell Trubisky is impotent. So let's jump into Week 12. I just wanted to hit the high notes. Rampy's playing No Fried. Rampy's out of it. No Fried should win this matchup. There aren't a lot of threats for Aaron here. No Fried has the superior team. We're not going to waste time on it. Ben versus Cam. This is a classic rivalry. Love to see this, even though Ben is just narrowly on the bubble and Cam is essentially dead. I mean, essentially he is dead. I want to see if Cam is going to lose. Wow, 8 straight. It could happen. Rodgers is playing Minnesota, but Green Bay is sinking. Ben starting Dak. This is sort of weird because Ben has a lot of buys. Okay, Cooper Kupp blew his knee out. Why is he still on your team? That's weird. I know Kerryon Johnson was hurt. Ben's looking weak here. If there was a table to run, I don't think it's going to happen. Cam could actually win this week because Ben has so many people on bye. Olsen has looked decent. When Mac plays, he's healthy. When Mac plays, he's good. A lot of people predicted Josh Gordon to be the next big thing. He's been pretty good. If we look at old Cam's team, and I don't think Cam has watched a minute of TWIF in years, Saquon has been really the only reason that Cam has won any games. Let's just be honest. Rodgers has been good too, I guess, but I mean, there's just nothing here of note. He could beat Ben. I'm actually going to say that he will. The Josh Howard, Tariq Cohen thing's not doing it for me. There's just a lot of question marks here. The team is named Mahomes is where the heart is for a reason. Okay, like if Mahomes and Hill aren't starting for him, it's going to be bad. Stephen A. Race and Gruden's Grinders, another game that Spencer projected as a surefire win. Now, when he projected that, James Conner was probably going to be splitting time or not even playing. He's rolling with Jameis Winston, the crab leg thief, against Cam Newton. Now, Jameis Winston is playing a soft San Francisco in Carolina. In Tampa Bay. I was actually looking at Cam Newton. Cam Newton's playing Seattle in Tampa Bay. I think both of these guys are going to break 20 and do well. Mark Ingram, easy 15, I would say, against Atlanta's soft defense. James Conner up in Detroit. Hope he doesn't have sickle cell. He'll give you a dozen at least. Nick Chubb, my gaping, massive Chubb. I like Chubb, not in my mouth, but on a fantasy team. He's getting 10. Philip Lindsay looked great. He's playing Pittsburgh. Again, getting 10. This is going to be a great matchup. Adams at Minnesota versus AB. Now, I'm definitely giving AB the Browns. AB the advantage there, as my brain is starting to atrophy. Keenan Allen looks good. He's playing Arizona. That looks great, giving him the edge. Although, if we look at Jackson's bench, yeah, Woods is on bye. He doesn't have a whole lot of options. He's hoping that Torrey Smith plays. Oh, no, this is Traquan Smith, excuse me. My brain went into autopilot. Traquan Smith, of course, went off last week. He had a lot of points in previous weeks, but he had this goose egg where he had no targets in a 51-point route, which I think is why Spencer dropped him. And I had a waiver claim in for this guy, but Jackson got him. He's not practicing this week, and this is the disadvantage of doing TWIF on a motherfucking Wednesday, as Ari Gold would say. But let's be honest, if games are on Thanksgiving, it pretty much has to be done on Wednesday. I like Traquan not as much as Allen. Allen's looking to get at least 15. I mean, Arizona's defense, the Chargers are going to have the ball a lot. If you look at the Chargers' schedule, I think you're going to realize why they have so many wins. Don't expect them to beat the Pats. Don't expect them to beat the Don't expect them to beat the Steelers or the Pats or any of these top-tier legitimate AFC teams. The best they can do is upset the Chiefs when Andy Reid finally chokes. I think that's really the best they can hope for. Justin Tucker, the UT grad, going to get lots of points against Oakland. And by lots of points, I mean lots of points for a Baltimore kicker. He is top 10, but it's the Lamar Jackson show. So that is what that is. It's a running quarterback who, I mean, he's sort of like Vince Young when he came in the NFL, I guess. Who knows? Ben Roethlisberger on the bench here up in Denver. I do think Jackson will go with Cam. Cardinals defense against the Chargers. I don't love this. Spencer could very easily win this game. Both teams are strong at the top. Jack Doyle against Miami. I think Jack Doyle is going to get 4. That's my prediction on that. Adam Thielen's great, and he's playing soft-ass Green Bay. He's playing at home in a dome. I like that. That's at least a dozen. Doug Baldwin. Now, what can you say about Doug Baldwin other than the fact that he likes it in the crap box and he caught a touchdown last week? Now, I can't personally vouch for the crap box part, but if he's on your fantasy team, I bet you could. Not a fan of his. I'm actually going to probably take Spencer here. Jackson has a lot of people on bye, and Spencer has too many people who I think are going to get consistent points. So I have Spencer in a very competitive, exciting, compelling game. Clap for new guys. Quick hits. Deshaun Watson is going to have to hook up with Hopkins for clap for to win. If we look at new guys, okay, Lockett's been solid. Did he have a touchdown last week? Let's see. Did he? No, he didn't. And you know why? Because that guy that I just talked about had a touchdown. I think Lockett will get one, and Jackson's receiver won't this week. Mike Evans, I love. Soft-ass San Fran matchup. McCaffrey, he's been solid, we can see. And when I say we can see, I'm just going to go off of memory. He's gotten more touchdowns than he did last year. He's still a heavy-use weapon. The Panthers are really going to use him heavily. And I know I just said the same thing twice. That's why I have a co-host usually, guys. Because once I get about 45 minutes in, I'm doing the Charlie Clips bit where I'm going, and y'all are rocking with me, but Christian McCaffrey, he gets targeted so heavily and he's such a prevalent part of his offense, he's always going to get looks, and that means that he has a very high floor. It's part of what makes him so good fantasy-wise, and even though this isn't a PPR league, he's great in PPR leagues. Zach Ertz is very consistent. He sort of went from being pretty good to being very good last year, I would say. Love him at 2 rank this year. New guy's edge, definitely. Saving Matt Ryan in the anomaly. As far as I'm concerned, Seagouch's season ended last week when he lost to Weston. So let's just wrap it up by talking about the divisions. Etc. at the bottom. Maxman Kellerman's eliminated. Bing Bong 3 Ragnarok eliminated. Mahomes is where the heart is. This is a guy who's on the bubble. With Spencer sitting at 7-4 and playing Weston in his final week, you don't really have much hope for Spencer. And when I say hope, when I say Spencer, I mean Ben, of course. Let me take a sip of water here. My throat was more dry than Gronk's point production. So it looks bleak for Ben, because if you look at Spencer, who does he play? I'll tell you who he plays. He plays Jackson, okay, whatever. But after that, he has to deal with Sam and Weston. And that means that he's playing the other guy in the wild card hunt, and he's playing the guy who is essentially going to be the make or break difference maker for the other wild card spot. So that's bad for Ben, especially because he's a game behind. No fright has the division locked up here. Stephen A. Race, Spence, and the new guys. The new guys, I think, has too many hurdles to jump through. I don't really foresee him being a legitimate threat. I own the head-to-head tiebreaker against the new guys. Spencer's a game up on him. I wonder who he has to play in the final week. He has to play Aaron, so that is what that is. That's not the easiest matchup, but it's not hard. I mean, the new guys is still in it, but If you're looking at wild cards, it's between these top two teams in the Cursed Lands division, Weston and I. Essentially, whoever doesn't make it is going to be competing with Spencer. I have the tiebreaker versus Spencer. I'm currently up a game against Weston and have the point advantage. If I can beat Weston this week, the division is mine. With Spencer playing Weston in the final week, it makes it where if Weston beats me this week, which, as I said before, he has an edge, that final week is going to be a test game for Weston because Spencer's going to want it very badly, and he's going to be in a position where he's going to desperately need the win to get into the playoffs, and of course that would mean that Weston's going to be tested. These are two Aggies that want to beat each other very badly. That's the TWIF video, and subscribe, like, comment.